In the earliest ages of myth, in that dreamlike twilight, before the clear lines of history were drawn, the world moved at the slow, solemn pace of gods and heroes. It was a time when olive trees had barely begun to twist their trunks into the forms we know today, and the mountains of Greece still whispered the names of titans in the wind. From this quiet and ancient time, our story begins, not with the roar of battle or the clangor of arms, but with a gentle mortal woman and the threads of fate spun softly in her shadow. Her name was Alcmene. Born of noble Perseid stock, she traced her lineage to Perseus, the slayer of the Gorgon, that bright star among heroes who had cut through darkness with divine favor. Alcmene was a woman of rare beauty, but it was not her appearance alone that drew the eye of men and gods. She was modest and wise, graceful and devout. She was faithful. Above all, she was faithful. Her husband, Amphitryon, was a warrior prince of Tiryns, valiant and proud. But, as warriors often are, he was called away from his home, from his city, and from his wife. A conflict had arisen, and the duty of vengeance beckoned. Alcmene then remained behind, within the white walls of Thebes, her heart heavy with longing, her soul as still and watchful as the moon above the Mediterranean. And it was in this vulnerable stillness that the gaze of a god fell upon her. Zeus, the thunderer, the all-seeing, the father of gods and mortals, he who ruled from Olympus with a scepter of gold and a temper of storm, looked down from his cloudy throne and beheld Alcmene. He saw her sorrow, he saw her beauty, and in Zeus's heart stirred a familiar impulse, desire, mingled with purpose, the weaving of mortal fate with divine will. But Zeus, for all his majesty, did not descend in brightness. He did not announce himself in thunder or lightning. Instead, he veiled himself in mortal shape, cloaking his true form in illusion. For deception was the means by which he most often stepped into the affairs of mortals, not out of cruelty alone, but because the divine, if seen too clearly, would burn away all reason, all memory, all sense. And so, in the likeness of Amphitryon, his face, his voice, his scent and gait, Zeus entered the chamber of Alcmene. The gods, it is said, may shape time. Zeus, in his longing, drew out the night into triple length, stretching its dark hours until they ran like rivers beyond their banks. While the mortal world slept, while stars drifted overhead like gentle lanterns in an endless sea, Alcmene embraced her returned husband, unaware that he was not her husband at all. There was love, and there was union, and there was the spark of creation. And when Zeus departed, the first light of dawn began to rise over the hills. But scarcely had that light touched the earth when Amphitryon himself arrived, dusty, weary, and victorious from his campaign. He entered his home, eager for the embrace of his wife, only to be met with puzzlement, for Alcmene believed he had already returned. Slowly, with quiet unease, the truth began to form. The seers and sages of the court, murmuring over portents and dreams, confirmed what Amphitryon feared and what Alcmene could not yet understand. She had lain with a god. Thus it was that within her womb grew not one, but 2 lives, conceived on the same night by 2 fathers. The first was Iphicles, the son of Amphitryon, mortal through and through, and the second was Heracles, the son of Zeus, divine in origin, destined to bear both the weight and wonder of that birthright.
But as the twins stirred in the safety of their mother's body, events far above them began to shape their fates. For high upon Olympus, Hera, the queen of heaven, wife to Zeus, learned of her husband's latest betrayal. And her heart, long worn and wearied by his infidelities, grew cold with fury. Unlike other children of Zeus, who might be ignored or tolerated, Heracles became a symbol, a living insult to Hera's pride and power. And so, in her cunning, she moved to strike, not with fire or sword, but with careful celestial interference. Zeus had proclaimed that the next-born son of the line of Perseus would rule all of Greece. Hera, with her divine foresight, ensured that a different child, Eurystheus, a frail and whimpering descendant of the same house, was born first. She reached down with her power, delaying Alcmene's labor and hastening the birth of Eurystheus. Thus, the throne and glory that might have belonged to Heracles was lost before he ever opened his eyes. This, dear listener, is how fate quietly shifts beneath the surface of the world, not with loud announcements, but with the subtlety of divine timing. When Alcmene finally gave birth, she held in her arms 2 sons, one quiet and mortal, the other already marked by strength. Now let us turn our gaze once more to the heavens, to that gleaming, cloud-laced realm of Olympus where gods reclined upon thrones carved of wind and sunlight. Among them sat Hera, the queen of the gods, radiant and proud, regal and watchful. But her heart, wounded by betrayal, burned with a slow, simmering flame. Hera, wife of Zeus, had endured countless infidelities, for her husband, though sovereign, was also wandering in his desires. Yet none of those dalliances provoked her wrath quite like the one that had birthed Heracles. This child, this infant, he was not merely the product of divine mischief. He was a living echo of Zeus's defiance. And worse still, Zeus loved the boy. The very name Heracles, meaning glory of Hera, was a cruel jest, or perhaps an olive branch, depending on how one heard it. But Hera would not be pacified by names nor by silence. Her vengeance, unlike Zeus's passions, was cold, methodical, and enduring. And so, one night, while the stars hung low and soft over the sleeping city of Thebes, Hera set her plan into motion. From the shadows of Olympus she summoned forth 2 serpents, gleaming, silent, divine in form. These were no ordinary creatures of fang and coil. They were emissaries of the Queen of Heaven, gliding with eerie grace, their eyes glinting like chips of emerald fire. With divine purpose they descended, slipping through the veil that separates God and mortal, entering the quiet chambers where the twin boys lay nestled in slumber.
Alcmene slept the sleep of the weary and the watchful, her breath soft as evening rain. Amphitryon, too, lay in quiet repose. Only the night stirred, and within it danger moved unseen. The serpents slid across the floor, soundless upon the stones, their bodies coiled with strength. They drew close to the cradle, their tongues flickered. Their purpose was simple: to strangle, to poison, to snuff out the life of the infant Heracles before he could ever pose a threat. But fate is a patient architect, and destiny, true destiny, does not yield so easily. For in the cradle the infant stirred. It is said that Heracles awoke not with fear, but with curiosity, that he reached out not to cry, but to grasp. And what tiny fingers closed upon were not blankets nor toys, but the smooth, muscular coils of the serpents themselves. With no more than the strength of his infant arms, Heracles seized one serpent in each hand. He squeezed, not in fear, but in calm, and with a grip that defied nature, he choked the life from them both. The serpents writhed, their coils flailed, but Heracles was unmoved. His brother, Iphicles, waking beside him, screamed in terror, summoning the household from sleep. Alcmene rushed in, followed by Amphitryon and their attendants, and there they saw the child, Heracles, cooing and calm, holding in each hand the limp, lifeless body of a divine serpent. A hush fell upon the room. This was no ordinary child. From that moment, even those who had doubted came to understand that Heracles was not like other boys. There was strength in him, not only of muscle, but of purpose. A sacred defiance radiated from his presence. He had survived his first trial, and done so with the serene confidence of one destined for greatness. But Hera, watching from her throne of ivory and cloud, did not weep. She did not yield. If anything, her hatred deepened like a well whose bottom is never reached. For now she knew Heracles would not be destroyed so easily. His path would be longer, more arduous, and shaped by her enduring hostility. And so began a quiet war between goddess and hero, before words were spoken, before swords were drawn. A war not of armies, but of fates, one woven through each step of Heracles' life. But that night in Thebes, Heracles was still just a child, and after the serpents were taken away, after the shock passed, life resumed its quiet rhythm. They fed him, they bathed him, they held him close. But the world had changed. The earth had felt the ripple of his strength. The heavens had taken note, and Hera, in her cloud-laced throne room, now turned her full gaze upon him. From this point on, Heracles would never know peace in the ordinary sense. His life would be a tide of trials, each more impossible than the last. But for now, in that cradle of carved cedar wood, he rested, and the stars, those ancient watchers of all things mortal and divine, continued their slow, patient turning. So sleep now, listener. The tale of Heracles has only just begun. His trials await. His labors lie ahead. But for this moment there is quiet. There is the breath of a child and the flicker of starlight. And in the distance the murmur of gods plotting things mortals cannot yet imagine. Heracles,
child of power, sleeps on. Now let us drift onward, past the earliest days of swaddling cloth and cradle song, into the unfolding years of Heracles' youth, a time of growth, of learning, of shadowed wonder. Though only a child, he was not as other children, and all who looked upon him knew it. Heracles grew swiftly. The nourishment of divine blood coursed through his veins, and his body became a testament to his father's lineage. By the time he reached his early boyhood, he towered above other children. His limbs, already corded with muscle, moved with power he could not yet fully control. His voice, deep even then, rumbled with the laughter and frustration of one who lived in a world too small for him. Yet despite this strength, Heracles' upbringing was not of indulgence. Amphitryon and Alcmene, his earthly parents, were nobility, disciplined, dutiful, and devout. They believed that greatness must be tempered by knowledge, that strength must serve reason. And so they sought the finest instructors in Greece, scholars and masters from across the land, to shape the boy's mind and soul. Each tutor who arrived was awed by Heracles' physique, but warned by his unpredictability. His eagerness often outpaced his understanding, and the very force that made him remarkable also made him dangerous. Still, his education began in earnest. He was taught letters and laws, music and mathematics, rhetoric and reason. He studied astronomy to know the movements of the heavens, and philosophy to chart the contours of the soul. He was shown how to shape arguments with the tongue, how to measure justice with the mind. In the discipline of arms, Heracles shone brightest. Castor, famed for his martial skill, instructed him in the arts of war, sword-play, spear-throwing, and the shield's defense. From Eurytus, the prince of Oechalia, he learned the bow, and Autolycus, the cunning son of Hermes, taught him the subtleties of wrestling, the tricks of grip and leverage. Under these masters his prowess grew and soon surpassed even their expectations. But amid these noble lessons was one that would forever mark his childhood with sorrow.
Among his many tutors was a gentle soul named Linus, a man of music and of myth, a brother of Orpheus in some tales, and renowned as a master of the lyre. Linus was patient, precise, and deeply passionate about the harmony of sound. He believed that music calmed the spirit, softened the temper, and brought mortals closer to the divine. Heracles, however, was not so easily calmed. Though strong and eager in body, the boy struggled with finer arts. His fingers, powerful and clumsy, stumbled across the strings. His temper flared when the notes came wrong, when the melodies evaded him. Linus, like many teachers, sought to correct his student, to guide his passion into discipline. One day, when Heracles fumbled yet again at the lyre, Linus chastised him, firmly, but not cruelly. Yet to the boy, filled with the fire of frustration and the pride of being Zeus's son, the rebuke felt like a challenge. What happened next would stain his memory forever. In a sudden, uncontrollable burst of rage, Heracles seized the lyre, perhaps the very one Linus had used to compose divine hymns, and struck his teacher with it.
the blow was too strong, too swift. Linus fell, and Linus did not rise. Silence followed, a silence unlike any Heracles had known. The lyre broken, the music ended. The court wept, Alcmene grieved, Amphitryon was stunned, for though they loved their son, they now saw the cost of power unchecked. In later years, this event would be remembered not only as a tragedy, but as a turning point. It revealed the paradox of Heracles' nature, that within him lived both the savior and the destroyer, that the hand that would one day lift the heavens could, without meaning to, crush what was most delicate. He was brought before the council of elders in Thebes, and though many called for punishment, others saw the hand of fate at work. Some said it was Hera's lingering malice that stoked the boy's fury. Others believed it was simply the curse of being too strong too soon. In the end, Heracles was banished from the school. His lessons in music would end there, and he would carry the weight of that sorrow like a stone tied to his heart. From that day forward, Heracles turned inward. He threw himself into physical training, running through the hills of Boeotia, lifting boulders for sport, taming wild horses with bare hands. But something quiet had shifted. The joy of youth gave way to a more somber awareness. He began to understand that his power came not only with privilege, but with peril. And yet, even in this early sorrow, the seeds of greatness continued to sprout. He grew into a young man of immense stature and startling beauty. His beard began to form like dark ivy across his jaw. His arms, sculpted by nature itself, bore the ease of gods and the effort of toil. Already, tales of his strength spread across Greece, of how he slew a lion with a club, of how he broke the bull's back with a single throw. But his eyes now carried a weight, a look not of arrogance, but of restraint, as if he knew that within him lay a tempest and that the world could not bear its full force, not yet. And so, as the sun set on his childhood, Heracles stood on the edge of manhood, not yet a hero, but no longer a boy. Behind him, the music of Linus lay still. Before him, the road wound onward towards trials he could not yet imagine. In the quiet of that dusk, beneath the slowly turning stars, Heracles walked alone. And the gods watched. Always watching. There comes a moment in every life, silent and secret, yet shaped by destiny, when the soul must choose the path it will walk. For some, it arrives gradually, a gentle turning of the tide. For others, it appears all at once, sudden and luminous, like a figure emerging from the shadows. And so it was for Heracles. Now a young man, he had grown into a towering figure, broad of shoulder, deep of chest, with eyes like polished bronze beneath a heavy brow. His strength, already renowned across the hills and valleys of Boeotia, had become something more than rumor. Songs were whispered of his feats, though no bard dared yet sing them openly. But the time for muscle alone had passed. His mind, shaped by sorrow, now asked deeper questions. What is the purpose of power? What makes a life worthy? Was he simply to conquer beasts and win applause? Or was there something greater, something purer to be found? And so we come to the ancient tale preserved by philosophers and told beside fires under starlit skies, the choice of Heracles.
It is said that, weary from his wanderings and the weight of his own thoughts, Heracles once ventured into the quiet slopes of Mount Kithaeron. There the wind whispered through the cedars, and the earth was cool beneath his sandaled feet. He found a glade, a still and sacred place, and sat alone upon a rock. His brow was furrowed, his heart uncertain. Then, as the sun hovered just above the western hills, casting a golden hush over the land, he saw before him 2 women, each walking toward him from a different path. The first woman moved with ease and sparkle. Her hair flowed like molten gold, and her garments shimmered with rich colors. Her voice, when she spoke, was musical, sweet as the scent of blooming hyacinth. She smiled warmly and said, "Dearest Heracles, son of mighty Zeus, why do you sit in shadow when the world awaits your glory? Come with me. My name is Eudaimonia, but many call me Pleasure." She gestured toward a path, soft with flowers and dappled with sunlight. "Follow me, and all things will be yours with ease. Riches, rest, delights of every kind. You shall want for nothing. Your strength will lift no burdens, your feet tread no thorns. You shall dine on honey and wine, sleep in silken halls, and be adored for your beauty alone. Life, dear Heracles, can be sweet, if only you let it." And even as she spoke, the very air around her seemed to grow warmer, more fragrant, as if the world were leaning in to listen. Then, from the other path, the second woman approached. She was not dazzling, nor richly dressed. Her hair was bound simply, and her robes were rough spun. Yet her eyes, calm, steady, and ancient, held a gravity that pierced the soul. Her steps were firm, her voice deep with stillness. She said, "Heracles," without smile nor softness, "I am Arete. Some call me Virtue. I have no delights to promise, no gold to offer, no rest to give. My path is steep, its stones will bite your feet. Its trials will break your heart and test your strength. But it is the path of greatness." She stepped closer and met his gaze. "If you choose me, your days will be full of labor, your nights of longing. You will face hatred, betrayal, and sorrow. But through it all, you will forge a life of meaning. Your name will be remembered not for ease, but for endurance, not for comfort, but for courage." And in the windless hush that followed, the 2 women stood, one radiant and easy, the other quiet and strong. each extended a hand. Heracles sat in silence. He looked down at his calloused hands, hands that had held a lyre, then crushed a man, hands that struck beasts and lifted fallen comrades. He looked out at the world, vast and waiting. He thought of Linus, of his mother's quiet prayers, of his father's stern pride, of the serpents in his crib, of the weight he carried in his very blood. And slowly, softly, he stood. He turned to virtue. He said, "Lead me." And she nodded. No smile, no triumph, only a shared understanding. The first steps on a long, winding road had begun. It is said that this vision, this parable of the soul's choosing, was gifted to the Greeks by the philosopher Prodicus of Chaos, who taught that the life of virtue, though difficult, was the only path to true immortality. Heracles would live out that lesson. He would walk the hard road. He would bear its burdens. He would bleed, weep, falter, and rise again. And though many years and many labors still lay ahead, that choice, made quietly in a glade on Mount Kithaeron, would echo through every deed, every triumph, and every sacrifice to come. And so he walked on, not toward ease, but toward greatness.
The years passed, as years do, quiet and unhurried, yet shaping the arc of fate with each gentle hour. Heracles, now grown into his full stature, had become the strongest man in all of Greece. His name carried weight in every land where men told tales by firelight. And though his strength was legendary, it was not brute force alone that won him renown. It was his sense of justice, his willingness to serve, and the quiet burden of his humility. In time, his deeds brought him to the city of Thebes once again. It was there that he offered his strength not for glory, but for honor. The city was under siege by the warriors of Orchomenus, a powerful neighboring kingdom. Their king demanded tribute, gold and hostages, threatening ruin if the city refused. The Thebans trembled, and Amphitryon, though valiant, knew that only one man could save them. Heracles, without hesitation, armed himself. He bore no armor, only a lion's skin draped across his back, the hide of the Nemean lion, won in a later tale. His club, made of olive wood from the sacred groves, rested easily in his hand, and with the fury of justice he led the charge. Thebes was saved. The tribute was cast aside, and in thanks, the grateful king, Creon, gave Heracles a gift not of coin, but of kin. He offered the hand of his daughter, Megara. Megara was gentle, noble, and wise. She did not shrink from Heracles' shadow, nor did she bask in his glory. She loved him as the man, not the myth. And Heracles, weary from battle and bloodshed, found in her a stillness he had never known. Together, they built a quiet life. Their home echoed with laughter. In time, children were born. The number varies in different tellings, but some say 3 sons, others say more. Heracles, once feared as a storm of strength, was seen cradling infants, planting olive trees, and singing soft songs beneath the silver moon. For a moment, a brief and golden moment, he knew peace. But peace, for Heracles, was never meant to last. High upon Olympus, Hera watched, still bitter, still wounded, still unwilling to allow her husband's child a moment of joy. It was in the stillness of domestic bliss that she struck, not with spear or serpent this time, but with madness. It came silently, like a wind through a door left ajar. One evening, while Heracles sat with his children upon his knee, the madness descended. A divine cloud crept into his mind, thick and inescapable. The walls of the home seemed to twist. The familiar became foreign. The faces of his loved ones, beloved Megara, his sons, his daughters, blurred and shifted into visions of enemies, phantoms, monsters. He rose, shaking, confused. He reached for his bow, for his club, and then the horror. In that haze of divine torment, he struck. One by one, the children fell. Some versions say he believed them to be soldiers. Others say the madness showed him horrors that compelled him to protect them, ironically, by destroying what he saw as illusions. Megara screamed, but her cries became thunder in his ears. The madness was total, all-consuming, cruel beyond comprehension. When the veil lifted, it was too late. The silence was unbearable. The room once filled with love, now echoed only with stillness. Heracles stood among the shattered remnants of his life, his hands red with the unthinkable. He fell to his knees. He wept, not as a hero, but as a man broken. No strength could undo what had been done. No god came to comfort him. Only silence. He left Thebes. He did not wait for judgment. There was no punishment worse than the memory that now lived within him. The image of Megara's eyes in that final moment would haunt him forever. The weight of his children, now absent from his arms, became a burden he would carry to his final breath.
And so in his deepest sorrow, Heracles wandered, no longer a champion, no longer a husband, no longer a father, only a soul searching for a way to cleanse what could not be undone. He sought purification, and he journeyed to Delphi, to the temple of Apollo, whose oracles spoke the will of heaven. There he knelt, there he pleaded. "What must I do?" he asked the god. "How may I atone?" The answer would shape the rest of his life. It would not be quick, it would not be gentle, but it would be the path of redemption. And it would begin with a word whispered by the priestess of Apollo, a name he knew and loathed: Eurystheus. But that tale, dear listener, lies in the next turning of the scroll. For now, let us sit a moment longer in the stillness of sorrow, not in despair, but in reverence.
For even the greatest among us may falter, and sometimes the deepest heroism is found not in triumph, but in repentance. Heracles had fallen, but he would rise again. In the wake of unbearable tragedy, Heracles walked alone. His mighty frame, once the source of awe and envy, now bore the invisible weight of grief. Each step through the dust of Greece, through olive groves and across sun-bleached hills, echoed with the memory of what he had done. He did not eat, he did not rest, he did not speak unless spoken to, and when he did, his voice was quiet, broken at the edges, like stone smoothed by centuries of sorrow. No one dared approach him, for how could they? He was a man touched by the gods, a hero of strength beyond imagining, and yet he had destroyed that which he most loved. The madness was Hera's doing, all knew it, and yet the grief was his to bear. The gods had lifted the veil from his mind, but they had not lifted the weight from his heart. And so, in silence, he journeyed to Delphi. The temple of Apollo rose like a song from the stones of the mountainside, gleaming with white marble and crowned with laurel leaves that whispered in the wind. Here mortals came to seek the guidance of the divine. Here the Pythia, priestess and prophetess, sat upon her sacred tripod, her words shaped by the God of truth and light. Heracles approached not as a hero, but as a penitent. His head bowed, his lion's pelt, once worn with pride, now hung around his shoulders like a shroud. He did not look upon the crowds. He did not ask for forgiveness. He asked only for a path, a way to cleanse the stain upon his soul. The Pythia, shrouded in steam and sacred breath, closed her eyes and listened to Apollo. The god's voice, distant and deep, moved through her, and when she opened her lips, she spoke not her own words, but those of Olympus. You must go to Mycenae. You must place yourself in the service of King Eurystheus. For 12 years you shall serve him, as a slave not of man, but of fate. You shall complete whatever labors he commands, and through these trials you shall be purified. At the end of your toil, if the gods are pleased, you shall not die like other men. You shall be granted a gift most rare, immortality. Heracles said nothing. He nodded once. The name Eurystheus stung like salt upon a wound.
For this king, small of stature, petty of heart, was no equal to Heracles. He was a cousin, born of the same bloodline, yet frail, fearful, and weak. Worse still, Heracles knew the tale of his birth, how Hera, in her cruelty, had hastened Eurystheus into the world, so that he might fulfill Zeus's oath and rule Greece, robbing Heracles of that destiny. Now, by divine will, Heracles was to serve this man. It was not justice, it was not mercy, but it was the only path forward.
He left Delphi in silence, the sun high above him, the mountain breeze trailing behind. His feet turned toward Tiryns and Mycenae, where Eurystheus waited, not with welcome, but with suspicion. For even in his royal halls the king feared Heracles, feared the strength in his arms, feared the rage in his eyes. When Heracles arrived, he bowed, not in submission, but in resolve. "Command me," he said. "I come to atone." It is said that Eurystheus had a special room built for their meetings, a chamber where he could lower himself into a large storage jar and speak through a hole in the lid. So great was his fear of Heracles that he could not even bear to be fully seen. From this hiding place he issued his first commands. "You shall perform 10 labors of my choosing. Complete them all, and your crimes shall be forgiven." But Heracles knew these tasks were not designed for redemption. They were meant to crush, to humiliate, to end him. Each would be a trial not just of body, but of will, of mind, of spirit. Yet still he agreed. He agreed because he understood a deeper truth, that redemption is not given, it is earned, not in comfort, but in suffering, not through pride, but through obedience. And above all, he agreed because the oracle had whispered something more. A promise. If he endured these labors, if he completed them all without rebellion or retreat, then he, mortal though he was, would be granted the rarest of gifts, immortality, not as a man among men, but as a god among gods. To walk Olympus not as a visitor, but as one of their own. To rise beyond pain, beyond time. To be free from death not as an escape, but as a culmination. This was not a reward to be craved, but a destiny to be fulfilled, earned not by triumph, but by transformation. For Heracles, immortality did not mean freedom from suffering. It meant that suffering had a purpose. And so, without flinching, without flaring with pride, he rose from his kneeling place, turned from the fearful king, and walked to his first labor. Thus began the journey not of a warrior, but of a soul in the forge, a journey into darkness, into trial, into legend. Each labor would break him, and each labor would rebuild him, until at last the mortal clay would harden into divine flame. But for now, he was still only a man, stepping forward into his penance, carrying the hope of redemption like a lantern through the dusk. And above, the gods watched in silence.
And so, dear listener, the first of the 12 labors begins. The sun had not yet crested the horizon when Heracles rose that morning. He stood beneath a sky washed in soft gray, the stars fading like meteors as dawn approached. The lion's pelt he wore, the hide of a lesser beast, from some earlier battle, was slung across one shoulder.
His club, carved from the heartwood of an ancient olive tree, rested against his back. And in his heart there stirred not pride, but preparation. The labor set before him was one born of fear and legend. The people of Nemea, a low-lying region of Argolis, had long been haunted by a creature no blade could harm. A lion vast beyond reckoning, whose fur glistened like gold, and whose hide was said to be impenetrable. No spear could pierce it, no sword could slice it. This beast, more than an animal, was almost elemental, a creature of the earth, born perhaps of Typhon and Echidna, those monstrous parents of ancient horror. Or so the stories said. It dwelled in the hills and rocky caves near Nemea, terrorizing the countryside, dragging away livestock and warriors alike. Its claws, sharper than iron, rent armor like linen. Its roar shook the olive trees. And it was to this monster that Eurystheus sent Heracles, thinking perhaps that the first labor would be his last. Heracles arrived at Nemea not as a savior with fanfare, but as a solitary figure. He asked no favors. He offered no boasts. He walked among the frightened villagers and listened to the stories of those who had survived, to the mothers who had buried sons, to the silence left by vanished herds. He made his way into the wilderness. The landscape here was harsh and beautiful. Jagged stone, gnarled trees, dry brush, and ancient wind-carved hills. And somewhere amid this terrain the lion waited. For days Heracles searched. He tracked paw prints as wide as dinner plates. He found bones broken and bleached beneath the sun. He studied the terrain, and at last he discovered the lion's lair, a cave with 2 entrances, each yawning like a mouth into the stone. He paused there, not with fear, but with thought. Then, with great patience, Heracles sealed one of the entrances, rolling a boulder, broad and heavy, until it blocked the narrow opening. There would be no escape. And so, gripping his club and drawing breath, he entered the darkness. Inside, the air was cool and rank. The cave echoed with the quiet shuffle of paws, the faint whisper of breath. Then, silence. A low growl stirred the shadows. The lion was waiting. The fight that followed was not brief. It was not glorious. It was brutal, real. Heracles swung his club, but it shattered upon the beast's head, its hide unbroken, its fury only rising. The lion lunged, and Heracles dodged. He grabbed it, hands gripping its golden fur, and they wrestled in the darkness like thunder and mountain locked in embrace. No weapon could harm it. And so Heracles used only his strength, ancient and pure, drawn from some deeper well within his blood. He grappled the beast, arms locked around its neck, and held it, tightening with each breath, each heartbeat, each silent prayer, until, at last, the lion fell still. Its body slumped, heavy and warm against the stone. It was done.
But Heracles' task was not yet over. He had to remove the hide, proof of his triumph. Yet no knife could cut it.
No edge could part the golden fur. So he used the lion's own claws, sharper than any blade, to strip away the skin. And with it he fashioned his new cloak, a mantle of impenetrable strength, worn not as trophy, but as symbol. From that day onward, Heracles wore the lion's pelt upon his shoulders, and its head as a hood, its face a crown, its mane a cloak. When he returned to Mycenae, Eurystheus was so startled by the sight that he refused to receive Heracles directly ever again. He ordered that all future labors be reported through a herald, and he had a large bronze jar constructed so he might hide in it whenever Heracles came near. The king's fear was a mirror to Heracles' power. But Heracles himself did not gloat. He did not smile. He simply turned and waited for the next command. For this was only the first of 12. And though he had slain the lion, greater beasts lay ahead. But tonight, let us linger a while longer beside the cave where the lion once slept. Let us imagine the hush of wind through wild grasses, the scent of earth and stone. The first labor has passed, and a mantle of strength now wraps the shoulders of a man walking steadily toward the divine. The path is long, but Heracles walks it still. The Nemean lion had fallen, and with it the first step on Heracles' path was complete. But there would be no celebration, no rest, no warm fire or feast in his honor. Instead, there came only the next command, delivered through a trembling herald, sent by a king who now hid within a jar of bronze. The labor was clear, the danger immeasurable. Heracles was to journey to the swamps near the town of Lerna in the southern Peloponnese. There, lurking in the marshes thick with mist and rot, dwelt a creature, older than memory, born of chaos and shadow. It was the Hydra. 9-headed in some tales, countless-headed in others, the Hydra was no ordinary serpent. It was vast. It's coiled beneath the muck and water, its necks rising like towers, its fangs glinting with venom. For every head severed, 2 would grow in its place. It was a creature not of flesh alone, but of principle, a symbol of festering ills, of problems that multiplied when confronted without wisdom. And worse still, one of its heads was immortal, unkillable by mortal means. The Hydra was said to be the offspring of Typhon and Echidna, as the Nemean lion may have been, making it a sibling of Cerberus, of Chimera, of monsters that stalked the very edges of the world. To this beast Heracles would go. He brought with him not only his club, not only his bow, but also his nephew, Iliolus, a faithful companion and charioteer. For this labor, more than strength would be required. They arrived at the edge of the swamp, where the air was thick and still. The water steamed under the sun, and reeds bent low as if listening to secrets whispered below the surface.
Heracles approached the Hydra's den, a deep cave, half submerged in marsh water, veiled in brambles and old bones. He did not hesitate. With bow in hand, he loosed a volley of arrows into the darkness, a call to battle, a stirring of the ancient sleeper, and the Hydra awoke. It emerged not all at once, but in coils. Its heads, sleek and glistening, rose like dark flowers of death. Each one hissed, twisted, snapped its jaws. The ground trembled as its vast body dragged across the muck, water sluicing from its scales. The battle began. Hercules lunged forward, club in hand, and struck at the nearest head. With a crack of bone and sinew, it fell, but before he could turn, two new heads sprouted from the wound, hissing louder, angrier than before. Again he struck, and again the heads multiplied. Despair was near, but Hercules did not falter. He called to Iolaus, and the youth, quick of wit and steady of hand, brought forth the burning brand, lit from a nearby tree. As Hercules struck each head from the Hydra's neck, Iolaus rushed in behind, cauterizing the stump, searing the wound closed before it could sprout anew. One by one they worked. Strike, burn, strike, burn. The Hydra thrashed, its tail crushed trees, its venomous blood hissing as it struck the earth. A massive crab, sent by Hera to aid the monster, skittered from the reeds to attack Hercules, biting deep into his foot. He crushed it with a single blow, and the battle raged on. At last, only one head remained, the immortal head, leering with ancient malice. Hercules grasped it with both hands, struggling as it writhed and bit. He seized a great sword and severed the neck, and while Iolaus burned the body, Hercules buried the immortal head beneath a massive rock, trapping it forever beneath the earth. Silence fell. The marsh was still, but something more remained. Hercules, knowing the nature of the Hydra's venom, dipped his arrows in the black, oozing blood. From that moment onward, each of his arrows would carry the poison of that monstrous serpent, a gift born of death, to be used in trials yet to come. And yet, when he returned to Mycenae, Eurystheus did not rejoice. He refused to count this labor, claiming Hercules had not acted alone, that the aid of Iolaus invalidated the trial. Another labor would be added, another trial awaited. But Hercules did not argue. He turned, and he walked toward the next burden. Yet something had changed. He had faced a foe that could not be beaten by force alone. He had needed help. He had accepted it. And in doing so, he had learned not weakness, but wisdom. The second labor was done. The path continued, and somewhere in the deep hush between weeds and roots, the land remembered the fall of the Hydra
and the rise of the man who would become a god.
After the clash of the Hydra and the blood-stained waters of Lerna, the third labor approached not with roaring monsters or the cries of battle, but with quiet footsteps and golden light. It was, on the surface, the gentlest of all Heracles' tasks, but beneath that gentleness lay a challenge far more subtle, and in some ways far more profound. King Eurystheus summoned Heracles once again, though he did not look him in the eye. Hiding behind his herald, he delivered his next decree. The hero was to journey north into the cool and wooded lands of Arcadia, and bring back, alive and unharmed, a creature of divine beauty and sacred blood. It was the Cernian Aeneid. This was no ordinary deer. It was said to shimmer with divine light, its coat gleaming like burnished gold beneath the sun, its antlers long and curved like branches dipped in moonlight. Its hooves were of polished bronze, light against the earth, and its eyes, deep and serene, seemed to hold the wisdom of ancient groves. But above all else, it was sacred to Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, of wild animals, and of untouched wilderness. It was one of the 5 hinds she had once seen by the river Anaurus, shining like stars across the forest floor. She had captured 4 and yoked them to her silver chariot, but the 5th, the swiftest and most elusive, she allowed to roam free. To lay hands upon this creature was not merely difficult, it was dangerous, for it belonged not to man, but to the gods. Yet Heracles, bound to his labors by fate and guilt, could not refuse. He bowed silently to the command and set off into the northern lands. Arcadia, in those days, was a place of endless forest and mountain, untamed, ancient, rich with quiet life. Oaks and pines reached skyward in hushed reverence, and brooks ran cold and clear over smooth stones. The wind whispered in leaves like forgotten prayers. Here, in these sacred glades, the hind roamed, light of step, faster than any arrow, untouchable by hunter or hound. Heracles came not as a warrior this time, but as a seeker. He did not wear armor. He carried his bow, yes, and his club slung behind him, but he did not rely upon them. He walked gently, learning the rhythm of the forest, the sound of bird song at morning, the rustle of deer tracks at dusk. He listened more than he acted. He observed more than he spoke. Days became weeks, weeks stretched into months. Still, he did not capture her. He saw her often, distant and gleaming between trees, standing poised upon hilltops in the morning light, drinking from quiet springs in the moonlit hours. And each time he approached, she vanished, like mist, leaving only silence and golden footprints behind. And so the seasons turned. A full year passed. Winter brought snow, and Heracles wrapped himself in furs. Spring followed with fresh blossoms, and still he walked. Through summer's heat and autumn's hush he pursued, but never with anger. He began to understand that this labor was not about force, nor even about speed. It was about patience, about humility, about grace. At last, in the early dawn of a pale spring morning, near the gentle curve of the river Ladon, The hind paused to drink. There, with the river reflecting the sky like a polished mirror, Heracles moved, quiet as breath, sure as fate. He did not strike with violence. Some say he gently ensnared her in a net of silk. Others tell that he nicked her leg with an arrow, not to wound, but to slow. And when she collapsed, unhurt but breathless, he cradled her as one might hold a dream made real. And then, as the mists rose from the river and the sunlight spilled golden through the trees, Artemis appeared. She came not with thunder or wrath, but with a presence that stilled the wind. Her form shone like moonlight. Her hair was dark and bound in a hunter's braid. Her eyes, cold and clear, fixed upon Heracles with a gaze that pierced bone. She asked, "Who dares lay hand upon that which is mine?" Heracles bowed low, lowering his eyes. He did not boast. He did not explain away his deed. Instead, he said only this: "I was commanded, Lady Artemis, by Eurystheus, not for pride or gain, but as penance. I have harmed her not. I ask only that you allow me to fulfill this duty, and then I shall return her to you, unscathed, unbroken, unbound."
And Artemis looked into him, past muscle and strength, into soul and sorrow. She saw the truth there, the burden he bore, the humility he had learned. She saw that he did not seek to possess, only to pass through. And she relented. "Go then," she said, "but be swift, for the forest watches, and she is mine." Heracles carried the hind to Mycenae, and when he arrived at the palace gates, Eurystheus stepped forward to claim the creature for himself, to chain it, to parade it, to wield it as proof of his power. But in that moment, Heracles loosed his grip. The hind leapt forward, free again, and vanished into the wilderness with a swiftness even Eurystheus could not protest. It was gone, untouched. The labor was done. And in the heart of Arcadia, beneath the rustling leaves and the watchful gaze of Artemis, the golden hind ran once more. This labor, unlike the others, had not required blood. It had required reverence. It had tested not Heracles' strength, but his ability to withhold that strength, to walk in the world not as a conqueror, but as a guest. The third labor was complete, and in its completion, Heracles had learned to move with gentleness. He would need that lesson again before his journey was through. With the sacred hind returned to the forest and the approval of Artemis gained, Heracles once again turned toward Mycenae. His shoulders bore not only the mantle of the Nemean lion, but also the quiet weight of experience, his strength now tempered by reverence, his hands capable of restraint as well as war. But Eurystheus, ever intent on humbling the son of Zeus, had already devised the next labor. This time, Heracles would be sent into the chill breath of the highlands,
into the vast, snow-draped wilderness of Mount Erymanthos, far to the west, where a creature of immense fury and terrible force roamed wild and untamed. It was the Erymanthian boar. This beast was no common swine. It was said to be the size of a bull, with tusks like scimitars and hooves that shattered stone. It roamed the mountain slopes in a rage that knew no season, tearing up fields, overturning trees, and striking terror into every village in its path. None could approach it. No hunter dared follow its trail. It had become a legend of violence, of chaos embodied. Heracles was tasked not to kill it, but to capture it, alive, to bring it, bound and breathless, down from the mountain heights, and present it to Eurystheus like a prize. And so he began his journey. The road to Erymanthos was long and winding, carved through forests of pine and mountain laurel. Snow had begun to fall as he climbed higher, and the air grew thin and sharp. Heracles walked alone, his lion's cloak wrapped about his shoulders, his breath curling in mist before him. Along the way, he stopped in the land of the centaur Pholus, a creature of two natures, half man, half horse, and of deep wisdom. Pholus lived near the base of the mountain in a hollow cave lined with jars of sweet-smelling herbs and amphorae of ancient wine. Pholus welcomed Heracles with warmth and caution. "Rest here a while," said the centaur. "The boar is fierce, and the snow is deep. Let the mountains speak before you act."
And so Heracles sat by the fire, sharing food and tales. There was peace in that moment, a pause in the long march of labors. But fate, ever watchful, did not remain still. At Heracles' urging, Pholus opened a jar of sacred wine, one not meant for mortals, drawn from the communal stores of the centaurs. The scent wafted through the trees, calling out to the nearby centaur clans. They came, first a few, then many. The air filled with thunder as hooves beat upon stone and snow. They arrived in a fury, believing the wine stolen, and a chaotic skirmish broke out. Heracles defended himself, arrows flying swift and sharp, until the centaurs fled, wounded and confused. But sorrow followed, for Pholus, in curiosity, handled one of Heracles' poisoned arrows, drawn from the blood of the Hydra. The arrow slipped, a nick, a breath, and Pholus fell, slain not by enemy, but by accident. Heracles buried him beneath the mountain slope, his grief quiet and deep. Only then did he press onward, higher into the freezing mist, where the trail of the boar twisted like a river through the snow. He tracked it by the signs it left, gouged trees, churned earth, deep prints pressed into frost. The winds howled, the trees groaned, and still Heracles climbed. Then, upon a ridge wrapped in ice, he saw it. The boar was massive, its bristles stiff with snow, its breath billowing like steam. Its eyes shone with wild anger. When it saw Heracles, it did not flee, it charged, roaring like a storm, tusks slashing the air. But Heracles stood firm. He waited, steady as stone, and at the last moment he sidestepped, grabbing the beast by its tusks. The ground trembled beneath them as he wrestled the boar, not with anger, but with mastery. Slowly, with careful force, he subdued it, binding its limbs with thick ropes, holding it fast without taking its life. And so, with the great boar trussed upon his shoulders, he descended the mountain. When he reached Mycenae, Eurystheus, upon seeing the monstrous creature alive and snorting, leapt into his bronze jar and refused to come out until Heracles was gone. The sight of this wild, living fury tamed by the hero was more than the king could bear. The labor was done, and with it Heracles had faced not only the wrath of nature, but the chaos of misjudgment, the sorrow of unintended harm, and the challenge of sparing a life when destruction would have been easier. In the snow and the silence of the mountain, he had learned again that strength lies not just in power, but in endurance, in discipline, in the quiet carrying of grief as well as glory. And still, more labors lay ahead. But for now, the boar slept, the mountain whispered, and Heracles, ever forward, walked on.
A labor of humility and cleverness, where filth is confronted not by force, but by flow. With each completed labor, Heracles carried a different weight upon his shoulders. Not just the burden of myth and expectation, but the deeper, quieter gravity of penance. He did not seek glory. He did not wear triumph like a crown. He moved through his tasks like the wind moves through the trees, silent, persistent, leaving change in its wake. And now the fifth labor awaited. Unlike the monsters of earlier trials, this task presented no roaring jaws, no venomous fangs. There would be no arrows loosed, no wrestling upon frozen cliffs. Instead, Heracles would confront a different kind of foe, decay, slow and creeping, born not of teeth and claws, but of neglect, of disregard, of the long years when no one had dared to act. He was sent to the land of Elis, broad and green, home to rolling pastures and sun-drenched hills. Here ruled King Augeas, a man of great wealth, whose herds of cattle were vast and divinely blessed. The animals, sacred and healthy, were gifts from the gods themselves, thriving, fertile, shining in their abundance. But their abundance came at a cost. Augeas, though proud of his fortune, had long refused to clean the stables where these thousands of cattle slept and fed. For 30 years no hand had turned the straw, no shovel had lifted the waste. The stench stretched across the fields like a fog. The muck had hardened into layers, rising like geological strata.
Beneath the roof of the stables, time itself had curdled into rot. It was said that not even the flies dared remain long. When Heracles arrived, Augeas greeted him with amusement. What could a hero gain from shoveling manure? How could the mighty son of Zeus stoop to such a task? But Heracles looked not for praise. He offered a bargain. "If I clean your stables in a single day, will you grant me 1/10 of your herd?" Augeas, convinced of the task's impossibility, laughed and agreed, swearing an oath in the presence of his son Phyleus, who bore witness. Heracles examined the sight. He did not rage, he did not rush. He stood at the edge of the filth and thought not like a soldier, but like a shepherd, not how to destroy, but how to restore. And then he turned his gaze towards the rivers. 2 great streams flowed near the palace of Augeas, the Alpheus and the Peneus, clear and ancient, coursing through the land with quiet strength. Heracles, seeing their paths, saw not just water, but the possibility of cleansing through redirection. He labored not with brute force, but with ingenuity. He moved earth, he carved trenches, he broke walls, and then he opened the path. The rivers, swift and strong, poured into the stables, not in fury, but in clarity. They swept through the filth with a force only nature could summon. They washed away decades of waste, carrying it down to the distant seas. By sunset, the stables were clean, not scraped or shoveled, but renewed. It was not destruction, it was transformation. And in a single day, what had been shameful became sacred once more. But when Augeas saw what had been done and realized that Heracles had succeeded, his pride turned sour. He denied the oath. He claimed no bargain had been made. He declared that the rivers, not Heracles, had done the work, and thus no reward would be given. Heracles said nothing in reply. He left Elis calm and silent. His witness, young Phyleus, had spoken the truth, but Augeas exiled his own son rather than admit fault. Later, Eurystheus, too, refused to count the labor. He argued that Heracles had attempted to gain profit, and therefore the task was void. And so, what was to be the 5th of 10 labors now became one of 12. But Heracles did not protest, for he had learned something deeper. This labor had asked him to walk into filth, to enter what others feared to touch, what others ignored for decades. It had asked him to face decay without judgment, to cleanse without condemnation, to work through means not of violence, but of water, elemental, renewing, life-giving. This was not the triumph of might, it was the victory of understanding. For there are labors in life that call not for the sword, but for the channeling of forces greater than ourselves, tasks that demand not to be conquered, but to be rebalanced. The Augean stables were not merely a place of manure. They were a symbol of what festers when we delay responsibility, when pride blocks humility, when rot is allowed to settle into the corners of the soul.
and Heracles, in his patient redirection of rivers, showed not only strength, but wisdom. The fifth labor was done. The fields of Elis were clean, and far away the rivers flowed onward, carrying the burden of years into the waiting sea.
After cleansing the filth of the Augean stables, and watching the river waters wash away what had long been buried, Heracles once again turned to a new labor, one that would take him not into cities or mountains, but into the damp and whispering heart of the Arcadian wild. He was sent now to the lands surrounding Lake Stymphalus, nestled within the folds of Arcadia's mountainous embrace. Here the trees stood ancient and close, their roots deep in the dark soil. The waters of the lake lay quiet beneath veils of morning mist, and the reeds at its edge moved in ways that did not always match the wind. It was here, in this strange and dreamlike place, that a terror of a different kind had taken root, a terror that flew. They were called the Stymphalian birds, and they were no ordinary flock. Born perhaps of divine malice, some said they were children of Ares, god of war. Others whispered they came from some darker origin still. These birds were as unnatural as they were deadly. Their feathers were forged of metal, their edges sharp like razors. When they flew, they loosed those feathers like arrows. Their wings clattered like bronze shields, and their calls, shrill, metallic, rang out like a chorus of blades scraping stone. They did not simply descend upon crops, they scoured the land. They tore bark from trees, stripped orchards bare, left fields ashen and still, and their droppings, touched by strange poison, burned the earth beneath them. Entire villages had fled, abandoning homes and temples, unwilling to face the slaughter from above. The land around the lake had become silent, haunted. Heracles came alone. He stood at the edge of that vast and shallow lake, breathing in the thick air, tasting the rot of water too long undisturbed. The reeds rustled softly, not with wind, but with presence, unseen wings waiting just beyond view. He could hear them, their cries, their movement, their hunger. But how to reach them? The lake was marshy and treacherous. The ground beneath the water sucked at the feet. To charge into the reeds would be to fall prey to the very terrain, caught and pecked by beaks as sharp as daggers. Heracles paused. He listened. And then from the silence of the trees a presence emerged. Not loud, not proud, but serene. It was Athena, his eternal companion, the goddess of wisdom and war. She did not bring a sword. She did not summon a storm. Instead, she placed in Heracles' hand a simple pair of castanets, small clappers of bronze crafted by the divine forge of Hephaestus himself. "Sound is your ally," she said. "Let the noise drive them, and your aim will do the rest."
Heracles stood at the edge of the lake, castanets in hand. He raised his arms and clashed them together. The sound split the air, sharp, ringing, unnatural. It echoed across the water, vibrated through the reeds, startled the forest birds into silence. Again he clashed them, again, until the lake boiled with sudden wings. The Stympalian birds burst upward from the reeds, hundreds of them, shrieking, their wings slicing the air, their feathers falling like darts. They wheeled above the lake in a vast, whirling cloud of danger and wrath. Heracles was ready. He drew his bow. Arrow after arrow flew. Each one dipped in the venom of the hydra, each one fatal. His hands moved like rhythm, his aim sure and swift. Birds fell from the sky, their feathers flashing as they tumbled, their cries fading into the mist. But Heracles did not seek to slay them all. He struck just enough, scattering their courage, breaking their pattern, driving fear into their flight. And so the survivors turned. They flew not in rage, but in retreat, over the mountains, across the Peloponnese, into the far corners of the world, where myth would later tell of strange bird creatures haunting distant lands. The skies above Lake Stympalus cleared. The reeds stood still. The poisoned air was lifted. And the people of Arcadia, who had watched from a distance, crept forward once more, back into homes long abandoned, back into fields now safe to tend. The lake, once cursed, began to breathe again. Heracles cleaned his arrows. He laid down the castanets, and he walked from the lake not as a conqueror, but as a quiet guardian. For this labor had taught him something deeper than might, that noise, when used with care, can be power, that precision, not violence, is often the answer, that there are enemies which flee not from strength, but from sound, from cleverness, from presence. The sixth labor was complete. The birds were gone. The air, though still, no longer pressed with fear. And Heracles turned his feet once more toward the path ahead.
The journey across the sea was quiet. The world faded beneath him. The stars, unfamiliar, wheeled overhead. Time no longer moved in hours or days, but in silence and shimmering distance. At last he arrived on the island of Erythea, a land where the sky hung heavy and orange, where every hour felt like the moment before sunset. The cattle grazed in fields goldened with dry grass, their red hides glowing like embers in the strange, unending twilight. But Heracles was not welcomed, for waiting there were the guardians. First came Orthrus, the two-headed hound, snarling and massive, its fangs curved like sickles. It charged, its two mouths roaring in harmony.
But Heracles, calm and steady, met the beast with a single mighty blow of his club. Orthrus fell. Then came Eurytion, the herdsman, stout, loyal, armored. He raised his spear and rushed forward, shouting to protect his flock. Heracles struck again, not in cruelty, but with the force of fate. Eurytion fell beside his beast. And then from the hills the earth trembled. Geryon came. 3 torsos rising from a single waist, each armed, each armored, each face fierce with the fire of ancient blood. His bronze gleamed in the half-light. His voices echoed across the island in eerie unison. He came not in madness, but with purpose. He fought not wildly, but with the might of one who knows his place, who defends not for pride, but for duty. The clash was monumental. Heracles dodged and spun, arrows flying, sword flashing. Geryon advanced like a living fortress. But at last Heracles drew forth a single arrow, dipped in the venom of the Hydra, black and humming, and fired it through the air. It pierced Geryon through the flank, through his central body where the 3 forms joined.
And the giant fell. The island grew still. The red cattle, though sacred, did not flee. They stood quietly, as if waiting, as if knowing they would be guided now not by whip or bark, but by calm and careful hands. Heracles gathered them, yoked them together, and turned east. But Hera, forever the hand behind misfortune, was not finished. She sent a gadfly, small and relentless, to scatter the herd. The cattle bolted in all directions, over hills, across rivers, into forests and scrublands. Heracles gave chase. Days passed. He retrieved them one by one, never with rage, but with patience, not as a warrior now, but as a shepherd. He passed through Italy, where a new trial awaited. The fire-breathing giant Cacus, who lived in a cave high above the Tiber River, stole some of the cattle and dragged them backward into his lair, masking their trail. But Heracles heard their calls. He found them, broke open the cave, and defeated Cacus in fire and smoke. And still the journey went on, through lands where men had never walked, over rivers yet unnamed. The herd moved like a red ribbon across the continent, and at last Heracles returned to Mycenae, tired but whole. Eurystheus accepted the cattle. Some say they were sacrificed to Hera. Others say they vanished, taken back by the gods. But Heracles had done what no other had done. He had crossed the world, stood where day ends, and returned with the living flame of the West. The 10th labor was complete. And though he bore no crown, no gift, no prize, he bore the memory of lands beyond sun and sea, where silence has weight, and time folds softly upon itself. 2 labors remained, and the road led higher still, toward golden trees, toward death's own gate.
By now, Heracles had wandered across every corner of the known world and beyond it. His hands had grappled with lions, his shoulders had borne the sky, his heart had carried the weight of grief and grace. And still the road stretched on. The 11th labor called not for blood, nor brute force, nor the vanquishing of monsters. It called for patience, for wisdom, and for trust. He was sent to retrieve the golden apples of the Hesperides, fruit said to grow only in the garden of the West, where time moved like honey and stars whispered in the trees. These apples were sacred. They were not made for men. They had been given as a gift to Hera, queen of the gods, by Gaia, the earth herself, as a wedding present when Hera joined with Zeus. They grew upon a single tree, tall and ancient, its roots deep in the bones of the world, its leaves golden green and rustling with secrets. The tree was nestled in a garden known only in half-remembered hymns, tended by the Hesperides, nymphs of the evening, daughters of twilight. They moved like wind between branches, singing songs that kept the light soft and the air calm. And at the tree's base, guarding its sacred bounty, lay Ladon, the dragon. Not a creature of chaos, but of order. With 100 heads, each facing a different direction, Ladon circled the tree in coils of unbroken vigilance. He did not sleep. He did not err. He had guarded the tree since the dawn of Hera's reign. To touch the apples was to defy the gods. But Heracles was tasked not with pleasing the gods, but with fulfilling a command. Eurystheus, petty and ambitious, demanded the apples, not to eat, not to honor, but to possess, as though even divine gifts might be collected like trophies. And so Heracles set out. But no map held the garden, no trail marked the way. He wandered through strange lands, asking questions that were met with silence or laughter. He climbed snow-streaked peaks and forded rivers choked with fog. He slept beneath the stars and walked beneath the moon, listening for whispers of where the sacred garden might lie. His journey was not linear. It was circular, spiraling through stories and riddles, through regions where the air grew thin and the birds did not sing. In time he came to the sea, and there, sleeping beside a tide of pale foam and drifting kelp, he found the ancient shape of Nereus, the old man of the sea. Nereus was of the first generation of sea gods. He was older than Poseidon, older even than the storm. His hair flowed with seaweed. His skin was salted by centuries. Heracles approached in silence, but when Nereus stirred, he transformed at once into fish, into flame, into wind and bird and wave. Heracles held on, not forcefully, but with the calm strength of one who has learned patience. And at last Nereus returned to form. He sat up and blinked.
And then he spoke of the west, of a garden wrapped in wind, hidden beyond mortal reach, of the dragon who never blinked, of Atlas who knew the way. Heracles bowed in thanks and walked westward again. He came to the Caucasus Mountains, jagged and tall, where thunder echoed against sheer cliffs. And there he saw a sight unlike any other, a figure chained to the stone, his arms spread, his body torn, Prometheus, the Titan. He had given fire to mankind and paid dearly for it. Each day an eagle came, tearing his liver. Each night it regrew. His agony had become a rhythm as regular as sunrise. Heracles, without a word, not in anger or haste, lifted his bow and killed the eagle. It fell with a scream. The air was still. Prometheus gasped. The pain stopped.
And then, gently, the Titans spoke. You seek the apples. Seek Atlas. He knows the grove. And so Heracles climbed once more, across windswept plains and past silent stones, to a place at the edge of the world where Atlas stood. Atlas, father of the Hesperides, Atlas whose shoulders bore the dome of the sky, the stars, the winds, the hidden turning of the firmament. His knees bent, his arms wide, his face serene and ancient. Heracles offered a bargain. I will bear your burden, he said, while you fetch the apples. Atlas, curious and willing, agreed, and Heracles took the heavens upon his back, not metaphorically, but truly. The stars moved above his brow. The sky pressed down like history. The world turned through him, and Atlas, now free, moved with surprising grace. He vanished into the west, and Heracles stood alone, bearing the cosmos. The air did not stir, time did not pass. He could feel the tension of the seasons, the weight of snow forming in distant clouds, the hiss of meteor dust streaking beyond the stars. His breath came slow and deep. He did not move. At last, Atlas returned. The apples were in his hands, radiant, golden, fragrant like late summer. But Atlas had tasted freedom. He said, I shall carry them to Mycenae for you. You may remain here a while longer. Heracles smiled. Of course, only would you hold the sky again, just for a moment, so I may adjust my cloak? Atlas agreed. And Heracles stepped away, apples in hand. The sky fell once more upon the Titan's shoulders. Heracles walked quietly eastward. The apples did not fade. They seemed to hum. They were not for eating, nor showing, but for remembering, a fragment of divinity held in mortal hands. He returned to Eurystheus, who took them with trembling fingers. but even the king knew he could not keep them. Hera had them returned to the garden, where Ladon still circled, and the Hesperides sang. Heracles did not mourn their absence. He had stood beneath the stars. He had cradled the wheel of the world. He had found peace not in the taking, but in the bearing. The 11th labor was done, and now the path bent downward. The final task would lead not across oceans or mountains, but into the realm of the dead. The final labor, most perilous, most profound, awaited Heracles not in the heights of mountains, nor at the edge of the world, but in the depths below it. Cerberus, the guardian of the gates of Hades. To bring him to the surface, alive, unharmed, and through strength alone, was the command of Eurystheus, who perhaps believed this task would at last break the son of Zeus. For none had gone into the land of the dead and returned, save with the aid of the gods themselves. But Heracles did not falter.
He journeyed south to the Cape of Taenarum, a lonely promontory jutting into the sea, where an ancient cave marked one of the few known entrances to Hades. It was a place long feared, where offerings to the dead were cast into the darkness, and the wind carried a chill beyond natural air. Hercules entered the cavern alone, no weapons in hand, no companions at his side. The light diminished behind him, and he moved downward, slowly, step by step, into a silence so complete that even his own breath seemed distant. The path spiraled through rock and mist. Strange shadows flickered along the walls, forms that did not match his own, as though the cave remembered every traveler it had swallowed. He crossed through realms of the lost, passing the unburied dead who wandered in confusion, calling names long forgotten. He passed by the ghostly groves of asphodel, where souls of ordinary lives wandered aimlessly, soft and silver, with eyes dim from memory. At the river Styx, Heracles met Charon, the eternal ferryman. His skiff rested atop the black waters, gliding soundlessly across. Charon, recognizing the demigod, allowed him passage, either through divine decree or awe. Onward, Heracles came to the throne of Hades, dark-bearded and still, and Persephone, luminous and cold as winter moonlight. He bowed, offering no arrogance. He requested, not demanded, the right to take Cerberus to the world above. And the Lord of the Dead, amused by Heracles' bravery, agreed on a single condition. He must take the hound without weapons, using only his hands and his will. Heracles descended deeper to the black gates guarded by Cerberus, a creature of fur, fang, and fury.
His 3 heads snarled in unison, and his tail, a serpent, lashed to the dust. His eyes burned with eternal watchfulness. But Heracles did not retreat. He stepped forward, hands open, arms ready. Cerberus lunged, and the struggle began, a blur of claws and limbs and roars. Heracles wrestled the beast to the ground, enduring bites, resisting the searing strength of all 3 heads. He did not strike to harm, only to subdue. And in time the creature stilled beneath him. Breathing heavily, Heracles rose, Cerberus in his grasp. Through the darkness they traveled, hero and hound, past stunned shades and silent sentinels. When they reached the surface once more, sunlight broke across their backs. At the gates of Mycenae, Eurystheus beheld Cerberus and fled in terror, hiding in a jar, trembling. The king had demanded the impossible, and Heracles had made it real. And so the hound was returned, uninjured, to its post beneath the world. The labor was fulfilled. The circle was closed, and Heracles, having faced death and returned, stood now not just as a hero, but something more than mortal, not by blood, but by deed, and by the stillness he had brought back with him from the depths.
With the 12th labor complete, Heracles stood at the edge of a strange stillness. The great tasks were behind him, the lion slain, the stables cleansed, the golden apples retrieved. He had seen the ends of the world and returned from beneath it. No monster, no king, no wilderness had broken him. He had fulfilled the impossible. And yet, the end of the labors did not bring peace. It brought silence. For 12 long years, Heracles had moved with purpose. Each step had been framed by necessity. Each deed demanded by Eurystheus. Now there was no next command, no appointed trial. His hands, once so full of burdens, now hung empty. And in that quiet, he became a man once more. No longer only the son of Zeus, the wielder of club and bow, but a soul asking, "What now?" Though his labors were complete, his legend had only begun to root itself into the earth, into memory. His name whispered across valleys and echoed across stone, became more than mortal. Yet Heracles himself was still bound by the flesh, by time, by wound, by the slow toll of sorrow. He wandered again, not to fulfill a task, but to understand himself. His journeys took him across Greece and beyond, where his presence inspired temples, where shepherds recited his name before journeys, where cities marked their gates with his symbol, invoking protection. He became, slowly, something greater than a figure of myth. He became an idea. But even legends must suffer,
And Heracles, though heroic, was not spared. He married again, this time to Deianira, whose name means man-destroyer, though she was not cruel. She was kind and fair, and Heracles loved her with a heart worn thin by labors and loneliness. But the fates were not yet finished, and soon Heracles would walk once more toward flame, toward the pyre, toward the place where mortal skin burns away, and something else rises, something deathless, shimmering, half memory, half star.
The tale of Heracles does not end with the completion of his 12 labors. If anything, that chapter marks the beginning of a more elusive journey, one that threads the boundary between the mortal and the eternal. For though his trials had been fulfilled, and his hands no longer bore the weapons of service, the world remained full of echoes that would not yet let him rest. Released from the yoke of Eurystheus, Heracles found himself not idle, but adrift. The rhythm of labor had been his heartbeat for so long that stillness became unfamiliar. He had faced lions, monsters, and gods, but he had not yet faced himself, his memories, his losses, his loneliness. With no king to serve, Heracles turned toward the mortal joys long denied to him. In the quiet corners of Greece, Heracles sought companionship, and in time he found it in Deianira, a noblewoman of Calydon, known for her beauty and for her quiet strength. She was not a trophy, but a partner, a balm to the bruises he no longer showed on his skin. They were married, and for a while he walked among shepherds and children, not as a warrior, but as a man. In those gentle years he tasted peace. But fate is not easily escaped. While traveling with Deianira, Heracles and his new wife came to a wide river, swollen with seasonal floodwaters. The current was too swift for her to cross unaided. A centaur named Nessus, strong and sure of foot, offered to carry her across while Heracles swam ahead. The offer was accepted, and all seemed well. But midway across, Nessus turned predator. Whether from desire, malice, or madness, he seized Deianira and attempted to carry her off. From the far shore, Heracles, now across the river, saw the struggle and instantly raised his bow. With precise fury, he loosed a single arrow, tipped with the venom of the hydra, the poison that kills without remedy. Nessus cried out, pierced and dying, but in his final breaths he sowed the seeds of tragedy. Whispering deceit to Deianira, he claimed that his blood, mixed with his dying breath, would serve as a charm, a talisman, to secure Heracles' love. If she ever feared his affections might wander, she need only anoint a cloak with the centaur's blood and give it to him. And then, he said, Heracles would never leave her again.
Grief-stricken and desperate, Deianira believed him. She gathered the blood in secret, tucking it away for a time when uncertainty might return. Years passed. Heracles, ever restless, traveled once more, not in labor, but in habit. He went from city to city, aiding the helpless, hunting bandits, building temples, righting small wrongs that kings overlooked. And in every town the whispers began anew, tales of Heracles laughing with maidens, dancing at festivals, charming the daughters of lords. Deianira heard these tales, and her heart grew heavy. In quiet sorrow, she remembered Nessus's words. She retrieved the blood and soaked a finely woven robe in the centaur's supposed love potion. She sent it as a gift to Heracles, hoping to rekindle the closeness of their earliest days. He accepted the gift joyfully, moved by the memory of her love. He put on the robe, and with it, pain. Not pain like that of war, nor the bruises of battle. This was deeper, venom-born agony. The Hydra's poison, laced within the centaur's blood, burrowed into his flesh. It ignited every nerve. The robe clung to him like flame. No matter how he tore at it, it only fused tighter, drawing blood, peeling skin. He cried out, not as a hero, but as a man undone by betrayal and sorrow. Nothing could remove the robe. The poison was unrelenting. Realizing that no cure existed, that no physician could ease his suffering, Heracles chose his own end. He climbed Mount Oeta, slowly, barefoot, each step heavier than the last. The winds there were cold but clean. The pine trees whispered, and the sky above opened like an old friend. At the summit he gathered wood. He built a pyre. And then, exhausted and calm, he lay upon it, his lion-skin cloak beneath him, his club laid at his side. The mountain was silent. No hand dared light the flame, until a shepherd boy named Philoctetes, trembling and young, stepped forward. Heracles smiled and gave him his bow and arrows, sacred weapons now passed from God to man. Philoctetes lit the pyre. The flames rose, orange and gold against the sky. They crackled not with rage, but with release. And then, within those flames, Heracles was transformed.
His mortal form, racked by pain, burned away. But his spirit did not scatter. The smoke rose high, and with it Zeus descended. He gathered the soul of his son and carried him upward to Olympus, the mountain of the gods. There Heracles was welcomed with reverence, no longer mortal, no longer bound by flesh. He was granted immortality. He was given a throne among the stars, a place among those he once served and challenged. And in Olympus he was united with Hebe, the goddess of youth and vitality, daughter of Hera. Once his stepmother and tormentor, Hera was now reconciled. Harmony settled between them,
and Heracles found joy that no longer had to end. He remained ever afterward not just a god of strength, but a symbol of triumph over suffering. A reminder that even the most broken path can lead to stars. His temples rose across Greece and beyond. Sailors prayed to him before storms. Wrestlers wore his image into contests. Children were named for him. And those in pain whispered his name, not for deliverance, but for endurance. For Heracles, born of mortal woman and king of storms, had endured all. And from his endurance a legend was born, not of conquest, but of transcendence. When Heracles left the mortal world in fire and smoke, ascending into the celestial vault of Olympus, he did not vanish from the thoughts of those who had once walked beside him. In truth, he became more present, more deeply woven into the rhythms of everyday life. For while he now sat among the gods, wreathed in divine light, his footprints remained visible in the dust of Greece. He was not distant like Zeus, nor shadowed like Hades. He was not unknowable like Apollo, nor cold as Artemis. Heracles was real. He had struggled. He had wept. He had wandered through stables and storms, deserts and underworlds. And thus to the people of the Hellenic world, he was not just a hero, he was the hero. A figure to whom they could bring their fears, their aching hands, their longings for strength and justice. He was an enduring companion, shaped in part by the myths of the past, but also by the daily lives of those who honored him. His cult took root early and grew everywhere. In Thebes, his birthplace, he was worshipped not as a distant deity, but as a son of the city, an ancestral figure whose labor and loyalty had shaped its fortunes. There processions passed through streets bearing his effigy, and athletic games were held in his honor. Citizens gathered around fires, telling stories of the lion's skin cloak and the club that never missed.
In Athens, his worship took on a philosophical and civic form. He was the embodiment of arete, excellence of soul and body. He adorned the entranceways of gymnasia, where youths trained in wrestling, running, and spear throwing. Before contests, they offered prayers not to win, but to endure, as Heracles had endured the 12 labors. In Delphi, his name was spoken in hushed tones beside the sacred springs. Although not an oracular god himself, his image stood alongside Apollo's, a quiet acknowledgement that even those chosen by fate must struggle to find clarity. Along the coasts and borders of the known world, sailors and merchants erected small eroa, hero shrines, dedicated to Heracles in the liminal places where sea met land, or where roads split into wild country. In these spaces of transition, the presence of Heracles gave comfort. His figure was painted on wine vessels and carved into shield blazons. His likeness stood in market squares and private courtyards. In every sphere of life, his memory was a quiet guardian. For the soldier, Heracles was the one who walked with them into battle, bearing not a crown, but a club, crude and resolute. For the farmer, he was the strength in the aching back at the end of harvest, the patron of labor honestly done. For the mother, he was a reminder that even the most powerful must endure loss and yet continue. In ritual, his cult blurred the lines between mortal and divine. He received both burnt offerings, like the gods, and libations poured into the earth, like the chthonic heroes. His worship was deeply flexible, expansive, and personal. One could honor him at a grand altar or with a whispered prayer at the edge of a field. He was, above all, accessible. There were annual festivals in his name, such as the Heraclea, where communities gathered to celebrate his strength, tell his stories, and perform feats of athleticism in homage. These festivals were not solemn like those of Apollo, nor ecstatic like those of Dionysus. They were celebrations of endurance, calm, earthy, and sincere. His temples varied in splendor. Some, like the Herakleion at Thasos or Kinosargus in Athens, were built of fine marble, adorned with murals and friezes depicting his labors.
Others were simple open-air shrines, marked only by stones and the scent of olive oil offerings. In Sparta, he was revered as the perfect warrior, fearless, disciplined, and self-reliant. Young boys training in the agoge were taught to admire his self-mastery, his perseverance in suffering. In Crete, he was invoked as a guardian of roads and travel, protecting merchants and pilgrims alike. Even in the most remote mountain villages, one might find his image carved into a gatepost or scratched onto a threshold, always watching, always near. His cult was not controlled by a priesthood, nor rigid in doctrine. It was a living tradition, evolving with the needs of each generation. New myths formed around him. New rituals were woven into the old. And when strangers came to Greece, traders, travelers, settlers, they too carried his name. For Heracles was not bound by borders. He was a figure who belonged to humanity itself. A bridge between mortal struggle and divine transcendence. A whisper in the wind after long labor. A presence in the quiet moment when strength returns. And thus, from shrine to shrine, from hearth to temple, the worship of Heracles flowed, not as thunder, but as a deep and steady river. As the legacy of Heracles spread beyond the rocky shores of Hellas, it found fertile ground in the rising heart of another civilization,
the Roman Republic, and later the Roman Empire. There, under new skies and in the embrace of Latin speech, the name of Heracles became Hercules. He did not vanish in this transformation. Rather, he evolved, reshaped by Roman values, by imperial ambition, and by the unique ethos of Roman statecraft. In the eyes of the Romans, Hercules was not only a hero of myth. He was a conqueror of chaos, a protector of law, and in time, a patron of empire.
The Romans saw in him a figure of virtus, the Roman ideal of manly excellence, a composite of bravery, duty, endurance, and unwavering resolve. He embodied the mos maiorum, the ancestral ways, yet also stretched beyond them, reaching into the realm of divinity while remaining relatable to mortal men. In early Roman religion, Hercules was already revered as a guardian of boundaries and a god of strength and agriculture. His earliest sanctuary in Rome, the Ara Maxima, the greatest altar, stood in the Forum Boarium, the cattle market near the Tiber River. According to Roman tradition, this altar was founded by Evander of Arcadia, who welcomed Hercules when he visited the future site of Rome during his journey to capture the cattle of Geryon. There, the hero had slain the fire-breathing giant Cacus, who dwelled on the Aventine Hill and had stolen some of the sacred cattle. For this deed, Hercules was honored by Evander with rites and sacrifice. This tale became one of the foundational myths of Hercules in Rome, a protector of land and livelihood, a bringer of justice to a wild and lawless world. The Ara Maxima was not a mere ceremonial site. It was a living altar, active and revered, where sacrifices were made and where the faithful invoked Hercules not in mythic song, but in practical prayer. Merchants, artisans, and common folk offered meat and grain, asking for prosperity, safe travels, and physical endurance. As Rome expanded, so too did Hercules' image. He was no longer just the strong man of old tales. He became Hercules Victor, Hercules the Victorious, a patron of military conquest, celebrated by soldiers and generals alike. His temples multiplied, including the Temple of Hercules Victor near the Circus Maximus, an elegant, round-columned structure that still stands in Rome today, whispering to the modern world of ancient reverence. Emperors, especially those seeking to project power and divine favor, aligned themselves with Hercules. Augustus, the first emperor, though more closely linked with Apollo, acknowledged Hercules in public games and temples. But it was his successors who embraced the hero more directly. Commodus infamously claimed to be the reincarnation of Hercules, often appearing in lion skin and brandishing a club in statues and coinage. He renamed months and cities in honor of the hero, casting himself as a living extension of Hercules' strength and divine mandate. But even beyond imperial imagery, Hercules permeated Roman daily life. In households, small statues of Hercules stood in Lararia,
the family shrines, alongside images of Laras and Penates, domestic guardian spirits. Children were taught his labors not only as entertainment, but as moral instruction. His perseverance, his labor, his eventual apotheosis, all served as a narrative of hope, that through discipline and endurance one could rise above fate.
In bathhouses, where bodies were cleansed and strength restored, mosaics often depicted the labors, Hercules wrestling the Nemean lion, cleansing the Augean stables, bearing the heavens in place of Atlas. These images reminded men not only of physical fitness, but of moral fitness, of the nobility found in toil. In literature, he remained a towering figure. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, admired Hercules as a model of fortitude. In tragedy and epic, he was interpreted not just as a brute, but as a man who suffered deeply and bore that suffering with silence and resolve. His myth resonated in provinces as well. His image found on altars in Gaul, carved into reliefs in Germania, painted in villas in Pompeii. In North Africa and Hispania, he stood as a talisman of order amidst frontier wilderness. Soldiers carried his image engraved in rings, etched into weapons, or sewn into their tunics. He was invoked not to escape hardship, but to endure it, to persevere. And in this way, Hercules became more than a Roman god. He became a Roman ideal, a figure who united old myth with new empire, a hero whose club defended not just cattle, but civilization, a god who walked once as a man and who lingered not in the clouds, but in stone, in muscle, in memory. From the earliest days of Greek storytelling, the tale of Heracles' 12 labors has inspired more than awe for feats of strength. It has been seen time and again as a profound allegory, an intricate tapestry woven with threads of meaning far beyond the literal. The 12 labors are, in many ways, a map of transformation, guiding the hero and the listener through stages of challenge, purification, and eventual transcendence. Ancient thinkers, poets, and philosophers often looked beyond the surface, seeking the truths encoded in Heracles' journey. The labors were read as the battle between order and chaos, the hero cleansing the world of monsters that symbolize the fears and wildness lurking in the human heart and society.
The Nemean lion, impervious to weapons, represents the indomitable self, our own pride and stubbornness that cannot be conquered by simple force, but only by patient, personal strength. The Lernaean hydra, with its multiplying heads, reflects the multiplying problems of life, addiction, temptation, despair, that grow if left unchecked, demanding resilience and wisdom. The cleansing of the Augean stables symbolizes the need for inner purification. It is the challenge of confronting years of neglect, habit, and emotional waste, and using patience and insight rather than brute force to bring renewal. The journey to the Hesperides and the burden of the heavens invites reflection on the acceptance of responsibility, the tension between duty and freedom, and the eventual grace found in carrying one's burden with dignity. The descent into the underworld for Cerberus is a metaphor for confronting death, shadow, and the unconscious. It is a journey of facing the deepest fears, emerging transformed, and integrating the hidden parts of the self. In later philosophical and religious thought, the labors of Hercules were compared to the hero's journey, a universal pattern of departure, initiation, and return. They echoed in the rites of passage of young men, in the struggles of the soul to move from ignorance to knowledge, from fragmentation to wholeness. Even in modern psychology, Hercules' tale finds resonance. His battles are seen as archetypes, the externalization of internal conflict, the embodiment of the human desire to overcome limitations and fears. His pain, his persistence, and his eventual apotheosis speak to the process of individuation, the path of becoming one's true self. The labors remind us that growth is not linear, that strength must be tempered with humility, and that even the mightiest must face the darkness within. Thus, the story of Hercules is not merely a tale of strength. It is a meditation on endurance, transformation, and hope. It invites each listener to find their own lion to wrestle, their own stables to cleanse, their own shadow to meet, and to know, in the quiet after the struggle, that the journey continues.
Hercules, the hero of unmatched strength and enduring spirit, has captured the imaginations of artists and writers for millennia. His image and story have been retold, reshaped, and reimagined in forms as varied as the cultures that embraced him. From the earliest days of Greek pottery to the grand canvases of the Renaissance and beyond, Hercules remains a symbol both of human struggle and divine possibility. In ancient Greece, Hercules first appeared not just in oral tradition, but vividly on ceramic vessels, black figure and later red figure pottery, where artists painted scenes of his labors for everyday use. These images often depicted him in motion, wrestling the Nemean lion, wielding his club, or stealing the golden apples from the garden of the Hesperides. The details were precise. The rippling muscles, the lion's imposing hide, the tension of a bowstring, each stroke narrating the tale alongside the vessel's practical purpose. These artworks were not mere decoration. They were teaching tools, storytelling devices, and a way to connect the mythic past with daily life. Hercules appeared on kylixes, drinking cups, used in symposiums, where stories were told late into the night. His labors echoing the struggles of the revelers and inspiring strength in conversation. Sculptures soon followed, with statues in reliefs capturing Heracles' form in stone and bronze. From the towering Farnese Hercules, a Roman copy of a Greek original, to smaller votive figures, the hero was immortalized with a blend of muscular realism and divine grace. These works emphasized both his human toil and his godlike endurance, a balance that fascinated sculptors and viewers alike. In literature, Heracles' story was told and retold through the works of poets and playwrights. The Greek tragedians, including Euripides, explored the hero's complex nature, his moments of rage, sorrow, and madness, as well as his bravery and strength. His labors were themes in epic poetry, but also a way to probe deeper human questions about fate, suffering, and redemption. The Roman poets embraced Hercules with enthusiasm. Ovid, Seneca, and Statius wove his story into their works, often highlighting the moral and philosophical aspects of his journey, his resilience, his flaws, and his eventual deification. As time moved forward, the figure of Heracles, or Hercules, transcended the classical world. During the Renaissance, artists like Antonio del Pollaiuolo, Peter Paul Rubens, and Albrecht Dürer revisited the hero, inspired by the revival of classical learning and a new emphasis on the human form and emotional expression. Paintings and sculptures from this period captured the physicality of Heracles with newfound naturalism, portraying his labors as epic human dramas filled with tension and pathos.
The hero appeared not only in grand mythological scenes, but also in allegories of virtue, strength, and struggle, ideas central to Renaissance humanism. In modern times, Heracles continues to inspire across mediums: film, literature, comics, and visual art. His figure is a vessel for exploring themes of courage, endurance, and the human condition. Through every age, through every brushstroke and word, Heracles stands firm, half mortal, half divine, always a beacon to those who face the trials of life. The myth of Heracles, while firmly rooted in the fertile soil of ancient Greece, proved to be an enduring seed that took root far beyond its origin, growing into diverse and varied forms as it crossed cultural and temporal boundaries. His story, a tale of struggle, endurance, and transformation, touched the hearts of many peoples, each adapting the hero to reflect their own hopes, fears, and values. In the ancient Near East, contact between Greeks and Egyptians led to an intriguing fusion. Heracles found a counterpart in the Egyptian god
Herishaf, a ram-headed deity associated with fertility, strength, and renewal. In temples near the Nile, the Greeks recognized traits familiar in their hero: physical power, protective strength, and an enduring spirit. This blending, known as syncretism, allowed Heracles to be honored within Egyptian religious practices, bridging two worlds and creating a shared language of divinity. Moving to Asia Minor, particularly in the region of Anatolia, Heracles' identity merged with local deities in complex ways. At sanctuaries such as Hierapolis, the hero was venerated as a healer and protector against sickness, an extension of his strength into realms beyond the physical battle. Festivals celebrated his life not only as a warrior, but as a figure who could purify and renew. Here, the narrative of the labors was interwoven with rites of healing and cleansing, reflecting the needs and beliefs of the local communities. As the Roman Empire expanded its reach across continents, the figure of Hercules became a unifying force, a symbol of strength and protection across vastly different cultures. In Gaul and Germania, Celtic and Germanic peoples embraced Hercules, blending his image with their own gods of war and endurance. Reliefs and statues from these provinces depict Hercules wielding weapons and wearing garments resonant with local traditions, an embodiment of cultural fusion. Through this adaptation, Hercules became both Roman and local, a protector and symbol of resilience in lands far from his Greek birthplace.
Throughout the Middle Ages, as Christianity spread across Europe, classical myths like that of Heracles faded from mainstream religious practice. Yet his story survived in transformed guises. In medieval bestiaries, his feats were reinterpreted as moral lessons, his battles seen as allegories of the soul's fight against sin and temptation. The labors became emblematic of the Christian virtues of patience, courage, and faithfulness. Manuscripts illustrated with images of Heracles' trials served as both spiritual instruction and reminders of the eternal struggle between good and evil. The Renaissance sparked a renewed fascination with classical antiquity. Humanist scholars, artists, and writers reclaimed Heracles as a symbol of human potential and reason. The hero's journey was interpreted through a philosophical lens, a metaphor for mankind's quest to master nature, to understand the self, and to rise above base impulses. Artists like Rubens and Michelangelo brought his muscular form to life on canvas and marble, while writers explored his psychological depth, his pain, and his perseverance. Heracles was no longer just a figure of raw strength. He was a complex emblem of human aspiration.
In the modern era, Heracles has found new expressions in diverse media, reflecting contemporary values and storytelling forms. In opera and theater, his labors and trials have been dramatized with soaring music and intimate emotion. On film, actors embody both the hero's might and his vulnerability, bringing his story to life for global audiences. The rise of comics and graphic novels has introduced Heracles to new generations as a literal hero and symbolic archetype, his struggles mirroring the eternal human themes of courage, resilience, and sacrifice. Beyond popular culture, Heracles' narrative has inspired psychological and philosophical thought. His labors resonate with concepts of the hero's journey, the quest for self-integration and transformation. His trials symbolize the confrontation with the shadow self, the overcoming of inner chaos, and the eventual realization of wholeness. In these many forms and interpretations, Heracles remains a living myth, not confined by time or place, but continually reborn, speaking to the universal human experience. His story, born in the ancient world, has traveled far, adapting like the rivers that flow through many lands, nourishing new fields, and reflecting the changing sky.
While the 12 labors of Heracles have long dominated the tapestry of myth, his story is far richer and more varied. Scattered across ancient texts, local legends, and oral traditions, there exist countless other tales, adventures and trials that add depth and nuance to the life of the hero. These lesser-known stories reveal facets of Heracles that the grand labors only hint at. His humor, his cunning, his moments of quiet reflection, and even his moments of folly. One such tale tells of Heracles and the Cercopes, mischievous forest creatures known for their trickery and thievery. These small, dark-haired imps delighted in stealing from travelers, and Heracles, ever vigilant, caught them in a trap. Yet rather than strike them down, he laughed at their antics, teaching a lesson in humility and mercy. In some versions, he tied them upside down to a pole, their mischievous laughter echoing through the woods, a reminder that even a hero could appreciate a jest. Another story recounts Heracles' journey to the land of the Dryopes, a people with whom he came into conflict. After defeating their king, he did not destroy the people, but instead offered them protection and refuge, showing a side of the hero as a leader and protector, not just a warrior. Heracles is also credited with founding cities and shaping landscapes, stories that root his myth deeply in the geography of the ancient world. For example, he is said to have founded the city of Thebes, or at least to have played a crucial role in its early history. These tales tie the divine to the everyday,
as if the very stones of the land carry his story. In yet another adventure, Heracles undertakes a journey to Troy, long before the famous Trojan War. There he aids King Laomedon, only to be betrayed, sparking a cycle of vengeance and heroism that would echo through the ages. Heracles' relationships with gods and mortals alike add further layers. His friendship with Theseus, king of Athens, illustrates a bond of mutual respect and shared strength. His encounters with figures such as Omphale, the queen who once enslaved him and made him wear women's clothing, reveal moments where the hero's usual strength was tempered by humility and change. Even the more tragic tales, such as his madness induced by Hera, leading to the accidental killing of his own family, highlight the complex humanity within the mythic figure. These stories delve into the duality of Heracles, the warrior and the sufferer, the godlike and the mortal. Each of these lesser-known myths enriches the portrait of Heracles, reminding us that his journey was not just about 12 monumental tasks, but a lifetime of trials, growth, and transformation.
The 12 labors of Heracles stand as monumental milestones in his life, a saga of immense feats, divine challenges, and heroic triumphs. Yet, the world of Heracles' myth is far broader, filled with stories whispered in the shadows of great deeds, less often told, but no less significant. These lesser-known tales provide a window into the complexity of the hero's character, his interactions with gods and mortals, his humor, his flaws, and his enduring influence on the landscapes and peoples of the ancient world. One such tale recounts the encounter with the Cercopus, mischievous, impish creatures notorious for their trickery and petty thefts. These small, dark-haired beings roamed the forests and mountains, harassing travelers by stealing their possessions or playing pranks. When Heracles crossed their path, the Cercopus sought to pilfer his weapons and possessions, but the mighty hero, rather than anger, met them with laughter. In some versions, he caught the Cercopus, tying them upside down to a pole, where they continued their mischief even in captivity, their laughter echoing through the forest. This story reveals a lighter side of Heracles, a moment of mercy and humor amidst his many battles. In another lesser-known adventure, Heracles came to the land of the Dryopes, a people known for their pastoral ways. Conflict arose with their king, Dryopes, whose name bore a close echo to his people. Heracles defeated Dryopes, but rather than bring ruin, he is said to have offered protection to the Dryopes, incorporating them into the greater Greek world. This tale presents Heracles not only as a warrior, but as a builder and protector, a figure who could bring peace as well as wield strength. Heracles' influence also extends to the very shaping of the land and cities. Ancient traditions credit him with the founding or shaping of many settlements, including the famed city of Thebes. According to some accounts,
Heracles' heroic presence and protection were essential in Thebes' early history, as he is remembered as an ancestral guardian. Through these stories, the divine presence is woven into the everyday life of the ancient Greeks. The stones and streets of their cities bear silent witness to the hero's journey. There is also the story of Heracles' earlier visit to Troy, long before the war immortalized by Homer. He aided King Laomedon, offering to build walls to protect the city from sea monsters, in exchange for divine horses promised by Zeus. But Laomedon betrayed the agreement, withholding the reward. In retribution, Heracles sacked Troy, killing Laomedon and setting a tragic chain of events into motion. This tale foreshadows the later Trojan saga and positions Heracles as a figure whose actions ripple through mythic time, shaping destinies beyond his own labors.
Heracles' relationships with other heroes and figures provide additional dimensions. His friendship with Theseus, the Athenian king and slayer of the Minotaur, is told with warmth and respect. The two heroes shared adventures, challenges, and mutual support, embodying the ideal of brotherhood among heroes. Yet not all encounters were friendly. The story of Omphale, queen of Lydia, who purchased Heracles as a slave, shows the hero in a humbled and transformed state. Bound in servitude, Heracles wore women's clothing and performed tasks far removed from his usual exploits. This time of enforced submission is often interpreted as a period of reflection and renewal, proof that even the mightiest must sometimes yield and adapt. The more tragic episodes of Heracles' life are also part of this fuller narrative tapestry. The terrible madness sent by Hera, which led Heracles to unknowingly kill his own wife and children, reminds listeners that heroism is not immune to sorrow and loss. This profound suffering adds depth and humanity to the figure often remembered only for strength and valor. All these stories, lesser known, sometimes local, sometimes deeply personal, paint a fuller picture of Heracles. They show him as a complex and evolving figure, a warrior, a friend, a builder, a sufferer, a man who laughed as well as wept. They remind us that the hero's journey is not defined by a handful of great deeds, but by a lifetime of experiences, choices, and transformations. In these quieter tales, Heracles remains alive, not just as myth, but as a symbol of the human condition itself. Flawed, resilient, endlessly striving.
Within the vast and intricate tapestry of Greek mythology, Heracles shines as one of its brightest and most enduring figures. Yet he exists not in isolation, but within a constellation of heroes, each reflecting different facets of human experience, virtue, and frailty. To truly appreciate Heracles is to place him within this broader context, understanding how his story complements and contrasts with those of his fellow heroes, enriching the ancient Greek vision of heroism. Perhaps the most immediate comparison is with Theseus, the legendary king and founder of Athens. Both figures represent strength and bravery, yet their narratives and personalities illuminate two distinct ideals. Heracles' power is often raw and unyielding. He confronts monsters and completes impossible tasks through sheer force and endurance. His labors are solitary and monumental, reflecting a heroic ideal of individual might and perseverance in the face of overwhelming odds. Theseus, by contrast, embodies a hero more aligned with cunning and political wisdom. His slaying of the Minotaur within the labyrinth is not only a feat of strength, but also one of cleverness and navigation through complexity. He unites the scattered peoples of Attica, establishing laws and social order. Where Heracles' story is one of physical conquest, Theseus's is one of civic responsibility and the foundation of community. The friendship between Heracles and Theseus in myth, marked by mutual respect and support, symbolizes the balance of force and intellect, of might and governance. Another prominent figure to consider is Perseus, the slayer of Medusa. Perseus's journey diverges from Heracles's in that it is swift and marked by divine intervention and magical assistance. He receives gifts such as Hermes' winged sandals and Athena's mirrored shield, tools that allow him to overcome his foes through strategy and grace. His victory over Medusa, a monstrous embodiment of terror and transformation, is as much about wit as about courage.
Perseus thus represents a heroic ideal where human limitation is overcome through divine favor and cleverness, rather than brute strength alone. Then there is Jason, leader of the Argonauts and seeker of the Golden Fleece. Jason's narrative is one of collective adventure, leadership, and complex interpersonal relationships. His journey involves navigating treacherous seas, engaging in diplomacy, and facing betrayal. Unlike Heracles' often solitary labors, Jason's quest highlights the importance of teamwork and moral ambiguity within heroism. His story reveals that heroism can involve negotiation, compromise, and endurance amid uncertainty. In the tragic arena, Achilles shares thematic echoes with Heracles. Both possess extraordinary strength and divine favor, yet both are touched by vulnerability and mortality. Achilles' rage, his fatal heel, and his early death underscore the fleeting nature of glory and the cost of pride. Similarly, Heracles, though godlike in strength, suffers madness, loss, and ultimately death, only to be reborn through apotheosis. These narratives delve deeply into the paradox of the hero, greatness intertwined with suffering. Odysseus, the archetypal trickster and survivor, offers another vital contrast. His heroism is less about physical might and more about intelligence, endurance, and adaptability. His long voyage home is marked by cunning escapes and negotiation with gods and monsters alike. While Heracles' labors focus on external physical challenges, Odysseus's trials explore inner resourcefulness and psychological endurance. Together, they represent complementary ideals: force and mind, action and contemplation. Beyond these, other heroes, such as Bellerophon, Atalanta, and Meleager, add further nuances to Greek heroic ideals, emphasizing traits such as skill, speed, and honor. The rich variety of heroes reflects a culture deeply attuned to the many ways one might embody courage and virtue. By exploring the relationships, similarities, and distinctions among these heroes, we see that Greek mythology did not present a single model of heroism, but rather a spectrum. Each hero embodied specific values, challenges, and lessons, collectively offering a multifaceted reflection on human existence. Heracles' unique place within this pantheon lies in his embodiment of struggle and transformation, the relentless battle against both external monsters and internal demons, the endurance of pain and loss, and the ultimate transcendence into divinity. In this way, Heracles is both distinct and deeply connected, a figure who stands apart in his monumental strength and trials, yet whose story resonates with the universal themes threaded through all hero myths: courage, sacrifice, suffering, and the pursuit of meaning. To understand Heracles fully, then, is to understand the rich mosaic of heroism itself, a dance of power and vulnerability, of solitary might and shared human experience.
The story of Heracles, woven deep into the fabric of ancient Greek culture, has transcended its original context to become a profound symbol of the human journey. Though born from myth, his tale reflects the universal struggles and triumphs faced by every individual seeking growth, understanding, and wholeness. Philosophers and psychologists across ages have found in Heracles a mirror to the inner landscape of the soul, a guide through the labyrinth of transformation. In the philosophical traditions of ancient Greece, Heracles was not merely a legendary hero, famed for his feats of strength. He was revered as an exemplar of moral fortitude and resilience. The Stoics, in particular, saw in his 12 labors a vivid metaphor for the trials that shape human character. Heracles' endurance of relentless challenges, his capacity to face suffering without bitterness, and his persistent commitment to completing his tasks embodied the Stoic ideal of apatheia, the calm mastery over one's emotions amid life's storms. Heracles' journey, then, becomes an allegory for the internal battle every person must wage. It is a struggle not only against external foes, but against the turmoil, passions, fears, and shadows residing within the human psyche. His story assures us that the path to virtue and wisdom requires confronting these inner monsters,
enduring pain and transforming suffering into strength. His eventual apotheosis, the moment when he transcends mortality and ascends among the gods, symbolizes the ultimate potential for human transformation, the emergence of a self integrated, whole, and free. Centuries later, the work of the psychologist Carl Gustav Jung brought new depth to the understanding of Heracles' enduring power as a symbol. Jung's theory of archetypes, universal images and themes residing in the collective unconscious, positions the figure of the hero as a central motif. The hero archetype represents the process of individuation, the journey towards self-realization that requires facing darkness, overcoming trials, and returning with newfound wisdom. Heracles stands as the archetype of the hero's journey in its most vivid form. His 12 labors, far from mere physical contests, can be interpreted as symbolic stages of psychological growth. The Nemean lion, with its invulnerable skin, embodies the ego's resistance and pride, which cannot be destroyed by force, but must be subdued through insight and persistence. The multi-headed hydra reflects the proliferating challenges within ourselves, compulsive fears, destructive patterns that require wisdom and steadfastness to overcome. The Aegean stables, thick with years of accumulated filth, symbolize the neglected and darkened parts of the self, demanding purification and care.
Heracles' descent into the underworld to capture Cerberus holds particular resonance as a metaphor for a journey into the unconscious, confronting the inevitability of death and integrating the shadow, the hidden, often feared aspects of the psyche. His moments of madness and profound sorrow reveal the paradox of the hero, immense power coexisting with vulnerability and fallibility. This reflects the psychological reality that growth and wholeness require embracing all parts of oneself, even those that are painful or flawed. The apotheosis of Heracles, his transformation from mortal sufferer to immortal god, can be seen as the culminating stage of individuation, a symbolic death and rebirth, where the hero integrates the lessons of his journey and attains a higher state of being. Beyond Jungian psychology, Heracles' story continues to inspire existential and humanistic perspectives. His narrative highlights the essential human capacity for resilience, the creation of meaning through struggle, and the embracing of suffering as an inseparable part of life's journey. He invites us to understand strength not as invulnerability, but as the courage to face and transcend adversity. In modern therapeutic and self-development contexts, Heracles remains a guiding figure, embodying the inner battles we all face. His myth
encourages a compassionate view of strength, one that embraces vulnerability and the complexity of the human experience rather than denying it. Thus, Heracles endures not only as an ancient hero, but as a timeless symbol of transformation, a beacon for those walking the path through darkness into light, from fragmentation toward unity, and from struggle toward peace.
The legend of Heracles, though ancient in origin, has never truly faded from human imagination. Across millennia, his story has been retold, reshaped, and reinterpreted to fit the sensibilities and artistic languages of countless generations. In the modern era, the figure of Heracles continues to resonate powerfully, emerging in diverse forms throughout popular culture, each iteration a reflection of the timeless appeal of his strength, his struggle, and his humanity. Cinema, with its capacity to bring mythic grandeur to vivid life, has long embraced Heracles as a subject. Beginning in the early 20th century, silent films and later Hollywood epics portrayed the hero's exploits with a blend of spectacle and drama. These films often emphasized his physical prowess and epic battles, moments of sheer kinetic energy designed to captivate audiences. The 1950s and 1960s saw a wave of sword and sandal films, particularly from Italy's peplum genre, where Heracles was featured as a muscular, larger-than-life figure embodying idealized masculinity and heroic virtue. Actors like Steve Reeves became iconic for their portrayal, inspiring a generation's imagination of the hero. In contemporary cinema and television, the myth has evolved to include more nuanced portrayals. Films and series explore not only Heracles' strength, but also his vulnerabilities, his struggles with anger, madness, and redemption. This more humanized portrayal invites audiences to see him as a deeply complex character, whose trials mirror the emotional and psychological journeys many face. Shows like Hercules: The Legendary Journeys and its related media blended adventure with humor and pathos, broadening the hero's appeal and accessibility. Beyond film, Heracles has made a significant mark in the world of graphic novels and comic books. Publishers have reimagined him both as a literal hero in mythological settings and as an archetype within modern storytelling. His narrative lends itself naturally to the comic medium, where epic battles, larger-than-life challenges, and the hero's internal conflicts can be explored visually and symbolically. Characters inspired by Heracles appear in various superhero universes, often embodying the themes of strength, tempered by human complexity. Games have also embraced Heracles as a central figure or inspiration, offering interactive journeys through his labors and adventures. These digital retellings invite players to step into the hero's sandals,
confronting monsters, solving puzzles, and experiencing the balance of power and vulnerability firsthand. Games allow the myth to become personal and immediate, adapting ancient tales to new modes of engagement. Heracles' influence is evident even in literature, where authors draw upon his myth to explore themes of heroism, suffering, and transformation. From novels reimagining his story in modern or fantastical settings, to poetry reflecting on his symbolic significance, Heracles remains a rich source of creative inspiration.
Moreover, Heracles' presence in popular culture reflects ongoing human fascination with the archetype of the hero who endures impossible trials and emerges transformed. His story speaks to fundamental questions about strength, identity, and the costs of greatness. It continues to inspire those who face their own challenges, reminding us that heroism is not simply about power, but about courage, resilience, and the will to continue. In this way, the ancient hero walks beside us still, in film, in stories, in pixels and ink. His legend, a living thread connecting past and present, myth and reality. The story of Heracles is one of the most enduring and influential myths in Western culture. From the ancient world to the present day, his legend has been a wellspring of inspiration, shaping ideas about heroism, morality, strength, and transformation in countless fields of human creativity and thought. In the realm of art, Heracles' image has been a favorite subject since antiquity. Ancient Greek vase painters and sculptors celebrated his labors, capturing his muscular form and dramatic struggles. The Roman world embraced and adapted these images, and throughout the Renaissance, artists such as Michelangelo, Rubens, and Caravaggio revisited Heracles with renewed passion. Using his myth to explore human anatomy, emotion, and divine struggle. His figure became a symbol of human potential, endurance, and the sublime tension between mortal suffering and divine aspiration. Literature, too, has long been shaped by Heracles' story. Ancient poets like Hesiod and Pindar immortalized his deeds, while later writers, from Ovid to Seneca, wove his myth into moral and philosophical reflections. Through the ages, his tale has been retold and reimagined, from medieval allegories to Enlightenment ideals, from romantic poetry to modern novels, always as a profound exploration of the human condition. Philosophically, Heracles symbolizes the journey towards self-mastery and virtue. The Stoics, for example, revered him as a model of endurance and rational strength. His labors are seen as metaphors for the trials that refine character and wisdom. His eventual apotheosis represents the possibility of transcending human limitations through perseverance and moral fortitude.
Heracles' myth has also profoundly influenced psychology, particularly in the understanding of archetypes and the hero's journey, as noted in the work of Carl Jung. His narrative embodies the struggles of individuation, the integration of shadow, and the pursuit of wholeness, concepts that continue to resonate in modern psychotherapy and self-development. In popular culture, Heracles remains a powerful figure, his image appearing in films, comics, video games, and literature. His story resonates because it speaks to universal themes: struggle and triumph, suffering and redemption, mortality and transcendence. He embodies the hope that through courage and perseverance, one can overcome even the greatest obstacles. Beyond the West, Heracles' influence has spread globally, entering diverse cultures and artistic traditions, blending with local myths and inspiring new stories. His myth transcends boundaries, reminding us all of the enduring power of storytelling to reflect human dreams and fears. In essence, the legacy of Heracles is not simply that of a mighty hero of old, but a living symbol of humanity's endless quest to confront darkness, to bear burdens, and to rise transformed. As we gently come to the close of this deep and immersive journey through the life and myth of Heracles, it becomes beautifully clear that his story transcends the simple recounting of extraordinary feats. It unfolds as a timeless meditation on the very nature of human existence, a quiet testament to the resilience of the spirit amid the ebb and flow of life's endless trials. Heracles' tale, with its weighty labors and tender moments, its moments of triumph and tragedy, invites us to peer softly into the depths of what it means to endure, to grow, and ultimately to transform. Heracles, in his mythic grandeur, is a figure of paradox. He is both mortal and divine, strong yet vulnerable, solitary yet deeply connected to the world around him. His life is a mirror held up to the human condition, reflecting back the complexities of strength and weakness intertwined, the shadows alongside the light. His 12 labors, which at first glance may appear as mighty battles against beasts and monsters, reveal themselves as profound symbols of the inner struggles we all face, the fearsome challenges of pride, the many-headed doubts that multiply in our minds, the deep stables of neglect and pain within ourselves that cry out for cleansing.
Through his story, Heracles teaches us the essential truth that heroism is not defined solely by outward power or conquest, but by the gentle, unyielding endurance that moves us forward when all seems lost. His path reminds us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the quiet choice to continue despite it. It reveals that strength must be softened with humility, patience, and compassion for ourselves and for others. His journey offers a soft invitation to embrace our own shadows with kindness, knowing that transformation often arises not from avoidance, but through facing our deepest pains with open hearts. In the long, slow unfolding of his story,
Heracles also embodies the possibility of transcendence, the radiant moment when mortal suffering gives way to divine illumination. His apotheosis is not a sudden escape, but the gentle flowering of all that he has endured, a quiet blossoming into wholeness. It is the reminder that within every trial lies the seed of growth. Within every loss, the whisper of new beginnings. As we listen to his tale, we find a companion for our own path, a steady presence in the night, a source of calm strength when the journey feels arduous. In the stillness after his labors, there is a space for rest and reflection, for knowing that the cycle of struggle and peace is natural, eternal. The myth of Heracles, ever ancient yet forever new, softly echoes through the corridors of time. It speaks to the child taking first steps, the wanderer lost in shadow, the weary soul seeking light. It reminds us gently that we all carry within us a spark of the hero, a quiet flame that can warm and guide, steady and serene. May this journey through his life and myth have brought you moments of calm, a deeper understanding, and a soothing sense of connection to the enduring human spirit. And may the quiet strength of Heracles accompany you, softly and steadfastly, along the path ahead.